The Grand Amphitheater of Nexus Prime was the largest structure ever built by intelligent life. It floated in the empty space between three dead stars, a monument to cooperation between species that had once tried to destroy each other. The walls were made of living crystal that sang when light touched them. The seats numbered in the millions, arranged in great circles that rose toward a ceiling so high it had its own weather. Today, every seat was full. 847 species had sent their representatives. Some were tall and thin, their bodies made for worlds with weak gravity. Others were short and heavy, built like living tanks. There were beings of pure energy contained in magnetic bottles. There were creatures that looked like Earth's insects grown to the size of houses. There were things that had no shape at all, existing as clouds of connected minds. All of them had come to witness history. High Chancellor Vorik stood at the center of the amphitheater on a platform that floated above a pit of swirling light. He was Thesson, which meant he had 4 arms, gray skin covered in protective scales, and eyes that could see heat as easily as light. His people had ruled 1,000 worlds for 10,000 years. They had been founding members of the Galactic Council when humanity's ancestors were still learning to make fire. Vorix raised all 4 arms, and the amphitheater fell silent. "Fellow citizens of the galaxy," he began, his voice carried to every corner by technology so advanced it seemed like magic. "We gather today to address a threat that has grown too large to ignore." On the massive screens that floated throughout the amphitheater, images began to appear. A blue and green world, third from a yellow star. Ships leaving that world in ever-growing numbers. Human colonies spreading across space like drops of water on paper, soaking into every empty corner they could find. "The species known as humanity," Vorix continued, "has been part of our community for only 112 standard years. In that time, they have expanded beyond all reasonable boundaries. They have settled worlds that were reserved for future use by established species. They have developed technologies they refuse to share. They have inserted themselves into every market, every trade route, every corner of civilized space." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many heads nodded in agreement. Humanity had always made the older species uncomfortable. They moved too fast, changed too quickly, asked too many questions about things they had no business understanding. "We have tried diplomacy," Vorik said. "We have tried economic pressure. We have tried isolation. Nothing has slowed their advance. Nothing has made them respect the boundaries that keep peace between our peoples." He paused, letting the weight of his next words build. "The Galactic Council has therefore voted, by a margin of 792 to 55, to declare a state of war against the United Terran Assembly and all its holdings." The amphitheater erupted. Some cheered, some gasped, some made sounds that had no human translation. The screens now showed military vessels from dozens of species, gathering into fleets of unprecedented size. "Our combined forces will move on human space within 30 standard rotations," Vorix announced. "We do not seek extermination. We seek only to contain a species that has proven it cannot contain itself. Humanity will be pushed back to their origin system and kept there, by force if necessary, until they learn to be proper members of galactic civilization." The vote was already done. The fleets were already moving. The message would reach Earth within hours, traveling faster than light through the communication networks that linked all civilized worlds. The Galactic Council had spoken. Now they waited to see how humanity would respond. Director Margaret Chen was 53 years old, with gray streaks in her black hair and lines around her eyes that came from smiling more than frowning. She had been humanity's chief diplomatic representative to the galaxy for 11 years. In that time, she had negotiated trade agreements, resolved border disputes, and talked 3 different species out of destroying human colonies over misunderstandings about property rights. She was eating lunch when the declaration arrived. Her office was on the top floor of the United Terran Assembly Building in Geneva. Through the windows, she could see the Alps, their peaks white with snow even in summer. Her desk was covered with papers and tablets, the organized mess of someone who knew exactly where everything was, despite appearances. Her assistant, a young man named James Park, knocked once and entered without waiting for a response. His face was pale. "Director," he said, "you need to see this." Chen looked up from her sandwich. Turkey and Swiss, her favorite. "What is it?" "The Galactic Council. They just broadcast to the entire galaxy." He swallowed hard. "They declared war on us." Chen blinked. Then she put down her sandwich, wiped her fingers on a napkin, and said, "Show me." The holographic display on her desk flickered to life. High Chancellor Vorix appeared, his gray face filling the frame, his voice booming with all the gravity of a species that had conquered stars before humanity invented agriculture. Chen watched the entire declaration without speaking. When it ended, she sat in silence for a long moment. Then she started to laugh. It began as a small chuckle, barely more than a breath escaping through her nose. But it grew, building into something genuine and warm, until her shoulders were shaking and tears were forming in the corners of her eyes. James stared at her. "Director, are you all right?" Chen held up a hand, trying to catch her breath. "I'm fine. I'm fine." She wiped her eyes and laughed again. "Get me the Assembly Council, emergency session, and get me Admiral Wu, General Peters, and the heads of every major defense contractor." "Should I tell them it's urgent?" Chen shook her head, still smiling. "Tell them it's funny." 2 hours later, the Assembly Council sat around a long table in the Situation Room beneath the Geneva building. 12 men and women representing the 12 administrative regions of human space. Behind them stood military officers, scientists, and advisors of every kind. The declaration from the Galactic Council played on the main screen. When it finished, Director Chen looked around the table. "Well," she said, "thoughts?" Admiral Wu, a small woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, leaned back in her chair. "They have no idea what they're doing." "That's putting it mildly," said General Peters. He was a large man with a face like weathered stone, commander of humanity's ground forces. "They've been watching us for 100 years and they still don't understand us." "Can you blame them?" asked Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, head of the Science Advisory Board. "We've been careful not to show them everything we can do." "We've been careful," Chen agreed, "because we hoped it would never come to this. We hoped they would accept us as partners. We hoped that if we seemed weak enough, non-threatening enough, they would leave us alone." "That clearly didn't work," said Council member Yuki Tanaka from the Asian Pacific region. "No," Chen admitted, "it clearly didn't." She stood and walked to the main screen, where a map of the galaxy was displayed. Human space was marked in blue, a small patch compared to the vast territories of the older species. But Chen knew that map was a lie. Human presence extended far beyond those official boundaries, into the dark spaces between stars where no one else bothered to look. "We have options," she said. "We could mobilize our full military strength. We could show them exactly what we're capable of. We could end this war before it begins, with enough firepower to make them never consider attacking us again." She turned to face the room. "But that's not who we want to be, is it?" Silence fell. Then slowly heads began to shake. "Humanity has spent centuries learning how not to destroy itself," Chen continued. "We've built weapons that could end worlds, and we've chosen not to use them. We've stood at the edge of our own extinction more times than any other species in this galaxy, and every time, we've stepped back. We've learned." She smiled. "The Galactic Council thinks they're about to teach us a lesson. I think it's time we taught them one instead." "What do you have in mind?" asked Admiral Wu. Chen's smile widened. "I think we should respond to their declaration of war with the one thing they will never expect. I think we should laugh at them." The response was broadcast to the entire galaxy within 4 hours. It showed Director Chen and her colleagues watching the Galactic Council's declaration. They sat in comfortable chairs, drinking tea and coffee, their faces showing polite attention as High Chancellor Vorix announced the end of peace. When the declaration finished, there was a long pause. Then Chen started to laugh. One by one, the others joined her. Admiral Wu covered her mouth, trying to maintain dignity. General Peters threw his head back and laughed like a man who had just heard the best joke of his life. Dr. Okonkwo had tears running down her face. The laughter went on for a full minute. It was not nervous laughter, not forced laughter, not the laughter of people trying to seem brave. It was genuine amusement, the kind that came from deep in the belly and could not be stopped. Finally, Chen managed to control herself. She looked directly into the camera, still wiping her eyes. "Oh," she said, catching her breath. "Oh my, you're serious." She paused, letting that sink in. "That's adorable." Then the transmission ended. On Nexus Prime, High Chancellor Vorix watched the human response with growing confusion. "What does this mean?" demanded Ambassador Krethval, the Silicoid Collective's representative. His crystalline body flickered with colors that indicated distress. "Are they mad? Do they not understand what we have declared?" "Perhaps their translation systems are malfunctioning," suggested the Thessan military advisor. "Their translation systems are fine," Vorix said quietly. He had dealt with humans enough to know that when they seemed to not understand something, it usually meant they understood it better than anyone expected. "They know exactly what we declared." "Then why would they laugh?" asked the advisor. Vorix did not answer immediately. He was remembering his first meeting with a human years ago, when he was still a junior diplomat. The human had been an old woman, a historian who had come to study Thessan culture. She had looked at their weapons, their military monuments, their history of conquest, and she had smiled with what Vorix now recognized as pity. "Your people have accomplished so much," she had said, "but you still think war is about winning." He had not understood then. He was not sure he understood now. "Increase surveillance on all human systems," Vorix ordered. "I want to know everything they do, every ship movement, every communication, every hint of military activity." "They are probably preparing their defenses in secret," the advisor said confidently. "This laughter is psychological warfare. They want to make us uncertain." "Perhaps," Vorix agreed. But deep in his third heart, where the Sans kept their most private fears, he was not certain at all. The humans had not responded to a declaration of war with fear. They had responded with laughter. And something about that laughter made Vorix feel, for the first time in his long career, like he had made a terrible mistake. On Earth, Director Chen stood at her window and watched the sun set over the Alps. The mountains had been there for millions of years. They had seen humanity crawl out of caves, build cities, destroy cities, build them again. They had watched humans reach for the stars and come back changed. Her tablet chirped. A message from Admiral Wu. "The Council's fleets are mobilizing. 43 species have committed forces. Estimated arrival at our outer colonies in 32 days. Chen read the message and smiled. 32 days, plenty of time. She did not send back orders for military mobilization. She did not authorize the activation of the weapons that humanity kept hidden in the dark spaces between stars. She did not even call another meeting. Instead, she sent a single message to every human colony, every ship, every station in human space. They have declared war. They are coming. Remember who we are. Remember what we have survived. Remember what we have learned. And remember to laugh." The message spread across human space at the speed of light, and everywhere it went, humans smiled. They knew what was coming, not war, education. The combined armada of the Galactic Council was the largest military force ever assembled in the history of intelligent life. 43 species had contributed ships, soldiers, and weapons. The fleet stretched across a region of space larger than most solar systems, a wall of metal and energy that moved slowly toward human territory like a storm approaching shore. Admiral Vethkal commanded the Thessan portion of the fleet, which made him the overall commander of the operation. He was old for a Thessan, his scales faded to pale gray, his forearms marked with the scars of 100 campaigns. He had conquered worlds, crushed rebellions, and brought order to species that had never known anything but chaos. He had never been more confused in his life. "Report," he said, settling into his command chair on the bridge of his flagship. His subordinate, a young officer named Threll, pulled up the latest intelligence on the main screen. "Sir, we are now 14 days from the outer edge of human territory. Our scouts have made contact with human vessels in neutral space." "And what happened?" Threll hesitated. "They tried to sell us things, sir." Vethkal blinked. "Explain." "Human merchant ships, 4 of them. They approached our scout squadron and offered to sell entertainment subscriptions, snack foods, and something called comfort blankets." Threll paused. "They also asked if any of our crew wanted to play something called video games to pass the time during the journey." "This is a war fleet. We are coming to invade their worlds." "Yes, sir." They seemed aware of that. One of the merchants said, and I quote, "War is no reason to be uncomfortable." Vethkal stared at the young officer for a long moment. Then he turned to his communications officer. "Contact command. Tell them the humans are not responding to our advance with military preparation. They are attempting to engage in commerce." "Sir, command is not going to believe that." "I do not believe it, and I am watching it happen." "Send the report." 300 light-years away, on a space station orbiting a gas giant in neutral territory, High Chancellor Vorix was receiving similar reports. His office was a sphere of floating screens, each one showing a different feed from the fleet or from human space. On one screen, a human merchant ship was teaching silicoid soldiers how to play a card game. On another, a human diplomat was sending gift baskets to enemy commanders, each one containing food items from Earth and handwritten notes expressing hope for a speedy resolution to this misunderstanding. "They are not taking this seriously," said General Morax, Vorix's military advisor. "This is some kind of trick." "What kind of trick involves selling snacks to an invading army?" Vorix asked. "I do not know, but it must be a trick. No species would respond to a declaration of war this way." Vorix pulled up more data. Human news broadcasts, intercepted and translated by Council intelligence. He had expected to find propaganda, calls for sacrifice, preparation for total war. Instead, he found humans talking about the invasion the same way they talked about sporting events or weather. "Did you hear about the Council fleet?" one human news anchor was saying to another. "Apparently they're sending 43 species to come yell at us." "Oh, that should be interesting," the other anchor replied. "I wonder if any of them will like our cooking. My cousin is on one of the outer colonies. She says they're preparing welcome packages." "Welcome packages? For an invasion force?" "She says it's important to make a good first impression." Both anchors laughed, and then they moved on to a story about a local sports team. Vorix turned off the broadcast. His hands were trembling slightly, though he would never admit it. "Find me someone who understands humans," he ordered. "Anyone. I do not care if they are council-affiliated or not. Find me someone who can explain what they are doing." On Earth, Director Chen was having a very good day. She sat in her office reviewing reports from across human space. Every colony, every station, every ship was following the plan perfectly. No military mobilization, no weapons activation, no evacuation orders. Instead, humans were going about their lives as if nothing unusual was happening. But they were also preparing, not for war, for guests. Her tablet showed the latest updates. The colony on Tau City Prime was organizing a festival to coincide with the expected arrival of council forces. The asteroid mining communities in the outer systems were preparing care packages for any alien soldiers who might need assistance. Human ships were mapping the Council fleet's supply lines and calculating where they might need to stop for fuel or repairs. They're going to be hungry and tired by the time they reach us, Chen mused. Long journey. Her assistant James entered with a fresh pot of tea. Director, we've received another communication from the Council. Let me guess. They're demanding we surrender. Actually, no, it's from Ambassador Krethvol, the silicoid who voted against the war. He wants to speak with you privately. Chen raised an eyebrow. Now that's interesting. Set up a secure channel. 5 minutes later, the crystalline form of Ambassador Krethvol appeared on her holographic display. The silicoids were among the oldest species in the galaxy, beings of living mineral who thought in patterns humans found almost impossible to understand. Krethvol's body flickered with colors that indicated deep uncertainty. Director Chen, he said. His voice was like wind chimes in a storm. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. Ambassador, I was hoping one of your people would reach out. The silicoids have always been the wisest voice on the Council. Flattery will not help you, Krethvol said, but his colors shifted to something slightly warmer. I need to understand something. Do you not comprehend what is happening? The Council has assembled the largest military force in galactic history. It is coming for your worlds. Your people will be conquered, your colonies dismantled, your species confined to a single system for the next 1,000 years. Chen nodded. Yes, that's what the Council announced. Then why are you laughing? Why are your people treating this as entertainment? Why are your merchants approaching our warships like customers at a festival? Chen leaned back in her chair. Through the window behind her, the Alps caught the afternoon sun, their peaks glowing gold. Ambassador, may I tell you a story? Krethvol's colors shifted to indicate consent. About 300 years ago, before we discovered faster-than-light travel, humanity nearly destroyed itself. We had weapons that could burn cities in an instant. We had missiles that could circle the planet and fall on any target in minutes. For 50 years, we lived with the knowledge that everything we had built could be erased in an afternoon. The Great Fear, Krethvol said, we studied this period. Then you know we came within minutes of ending ourselves several times. Political crises, technical errors, misunderstandings. Any one of them could have been the end, Chen smiled. But it wasn't, because at the last moment, every single time, someone chose not to push the button. Someone chose to step back from the edge. I fail to see how this relates to your current situation. Don't you? Chen's smile widened. Ambassador, we spent 50 years learning how to stare, extinction in the face and laugh. We learned that the only way to survive a world full of weapons was to refuse to be afraid of them. Fear makes people stupid. Fear makes them push buttons they shouldn't push. So we learned not to be afraid. She leaned forward, and for a moment, her eyes held something that made even a being of living crystal feel small. The Galactic Council has declared war on the species that invented nuclear weapons and chose not to use them. They have declared war on the people who built doomsday devices and then dismantled them because they realized destruction wasn't the point. They have declared war on the civilization that looked at the void between stars and said, let's fill it with life instead of death. Her voice was still warm, still friendly, but there was steel underneath. Do you not understand what you have declared war on? Ambassador? Krethvol's colors flickered through patterns too complex for human translation. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I am beginning to. The fleet continued its advance. Reports grew stranger by the day. Human ships were not fleeing. Human colonies were not fortifying. Human military vessels were visible on long-range sensors, but they made no aggressive moves. They simply watched, like curious observers at a parade. Admiral Vethkal called a meeting of his senior commanders on the flagship. We have intercepted human communications, he announced. Our intelligence specialists have translated them. The main screen lit up with text. Social media posts, news articles, private messages between humans across their territory. Vethkal read them aloud, his voice flat with disbelief. Did you see the council fleet? It looks like a parade. I hope they bring interesting food. My unit is betting on which species will figure it out first. I have money on the silicoids. This is just like that one neighbor who kept threatening to call the housing committee. Eventually, you just have to invite them over for dinner and show them they're being ridiculous. Should we be worried? I mean, it's the whole galaxy against us. Worried? My grandmother survived 3 world wars and 2 economic collapses. She says this is cute. Vethkal stopped reading. The room was silent. They are calling us cute, he said. They are comparing us to housing committees. They are betting on which of us will figure it out. Figure what out? Asked one of his commanders. I do not know. Vethkal's 4 hands clenched into fists. But I am beginning to suspect that we are missing something important. On a human colony world called New Portland, a woman named Sarah Okonkwo was giving a lecture to a group of local children. Can anyone tell me why we don't fight in wars like other species? She asked. A young boy raised his hand. Because we already had enough wars and they were terrible? That's part of it. What else? A girl in the back spoke up. Because wars don't solve problems. They just make new problems. Very good. And what do we do instead? We make friends, several children shouted at once. Sarah smiled. That's right. When someone is angry at you, what works better? Fighting them or understanding them? Understanding them, the children chorused. And when someone is afraid of you, what helps more? Proving they're right to be afraid or showing them they have nothing to fear? Showing them. Exactly. Sarah pulled up an image of the council fleet on her display. Thousands of ships, bristling with weapons, advancing toward their world. Now we have some visitors coming. They're scared of us, even though they're acting tough. What should we do? The boy who had spoken first raised his hand again. We should be nice to them so they stop being scared. That's exactly right. Sarah turned off the display. Now, who wants to help me make welcome signs? 14 days passed. The council fleet reached the edge of human space. Admiral Vethkal stood on his bridge, watching the sensors as they crossed the invisible line that marked the beginning of human territory. He had expected traps. He had expected resistance. He had expected something. He found open space and a single human vessel waiting for them. It was a small ship, barely large enough for a crew of 5. It had no weapons, no shields, no defenses of any kind. It simply floated in place, as if waiting for a bus. That ship is broadcasting, his communications officer reported. Audio and video. Put it on screen. A human face appeared. A young man with dark skin and a bright smile. He was wearing casual clothes and holding a cup of what appeared to be coffee. Hey there, he said, waving with his free hand. Welcome to human space. I'm Carlos, and I'll be your guide for the next few days. I know you're here to invade us and everything, but we thought you might want to know where the good refueling stations are. Also, we've got some great restaurants in this sector if anyone's hungry. The Thessans usually like the spicy food, and we've got a mineral bar for the silicoids that's supposed to be amazing. Vethkal stared at the screen. Oh, and if any of your crews need medical attention or anything, just let us know. We've got hospitals standing by. War or no war, nobody should have to suffer, right? Carlos took a sip of his coffee. So, ready for the tour? The bridge was silent. Every officer, every technician, every soldier stared at the screen with expressions ranging from confusion to horror. Admiral Vethkal slowly sat down in his command chair. What? he said quietly, is happening? On Nexus Prime, High Chancellor Vorix received the report with his head in his hands. They are offering us restaurant recommendations, he said to no one in particular. We are invading their space, and they are asking if we like spicy food. General Morak stood nearby, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. Sir, I believe we may have miscalculated. Miscalculated? Vorix laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the crystal walls. We have declared war on a species that responds with tourism guides. We have assembled the greatest military force in history, and they are treating it like a school field trip. He looked up at the screens, at the human ships approaching his fleet with offers of food and entertainment, at the colonies preparing festivals instead of defenses, at the human news broadcasts that discuss the invasion between weather reports and sports scores. Either they are completely insane, Vorix said slowly, or we are completely wrong about what we are dealing with. He was beginning to suspect it was the latter. And that suspicion was growing into something very close to fear. The first Council ships entered orbit around Tau Ceti Prime on a bright morning in the colony's spring season. The sky filled with dark shapes, warships blocking out the sun like a manufactured eclipse. Ground troops prepared for deployment, weapons powered up. Scanners searched for defensive positions, military installations, any sign that the humans were preparing to resist. They found a farmer's market. Admiral Vethkal stared at the sensor data in disbelief. The main city of Tau Ceti Prime, the largest human settlement on this world, showed no fortifications, no bunkers, no weapons platforms. Instead, the streets were decorated with colorful banners. Music was playing. People were setting up tables covered with food. "What is this?" he demanded. "Sir, it appears to be a festival of some kind." His officers zoomed in on the surface. Humans were moving around, laughing, carrying dishes and decorations. Children were playing in the streets. They appeared to be expecting us. Expecting us to what? We are here to conquer them. Yes, sir. I believe they are aware of that. The first landing craft touched down in an open field outside the city. Thassan soldiers poured out, weapons ready, forming into combat formations. They scanned for threats, for traps, for anything that made sense. An old human man walked toward them across the grass. He moved slowly, using a cane, his hair white as clouds. He wore simple clothes and carried a tray in his free hand. As the soldiers raised their weapons, he stopped and smiled. "Good morning," he called out. "You must be thirsty after such a long trip. I made lemonade." The squad leader, a young Thessan named Crix, did not know how to respond. His training covered ambushes, guerrilla tactics, and civilian resistance. It did not cover lemonade. "This is a military operation," Crick said finally. "We are here to occupy this colony." "Oh, I know. Very exciting. First time we've had visitors from so many species at once." The old man held out the tray. "The lemonade is good. My wife's recipe. Been making it for 60 years. Crix looked at his soldiers. They looked back at him. No one moved. The old man chuckled. "It's not poisoned, if that's what you're worried about. Though I suppose you have ways to check. Here." He took one of the glasses and drank from it himself. "See? Perfectly safe. Now, are you going to stand there all day, or are you going to come meet everyone?" The occupation of Tau Ceti Prime became the strangest military operation in galactic history. Council forces spread across the colony, establishing checkpoints and command centers. They expected sabotage. They prepared for insurgency. They trained for ambushes and attacks. Instead, they got dinner invitations. The San soldiers found themselves being approached by human families, invited into homes, offered food and conversation. The Silicoid contingent discovered a human artist who worked in crystal and spent hours discussing techniques. A squad of Vorn warriors, known across the galaxy for their ferocity, was adopted by a local school. The children were fascinated by their tusks and taught them human games in exchange for stories about distant worlds. Commander Krethval of the Silicoid Forces sent a report to Council headquarters that read simply, "The humans have captured 3 of my officers. They are being held at something called a book club. They have not requested rescue." On the streets of the colony's main city, a human journalist was conducting interviews with invasion force commanders. Her name was Maria Santos, and she broadcast to millions of viewers across human space. "So, General Morvik," she said to a 7-foot-tall Thessan with enough medals to start a jewelry store, "what made you decide to join the military?" The general, who had expected to be commanding the subjugation of a defiant population, found himself answering questions about his childhood. My father was a soldier. His father before him. It is tradition." "That's wonderful. Family tradition." "Very important." Maria smiled warmly. "And what do you think of the colony so far? The food? The weather?" "The weather is acceptable. The food is—" He paused. One of his aides had brought him something called a burrito that morning. He had eaten 4 of them. "The food is satisfactory." "Wonderful. Now, have you had a chance to visit the art museum? I hear it has a wonderful collection of interstellar pieces." Across the galaxy, council leaders watched the broadcast with growing horror. Their invasion was turning into a cultural exchange program. Director Chen received hourly updates from the front. "The Thessian ground commander has developed a friendship with a local chef," her aide reported. "They're planning to write a cookbook together." The Silicoid officers are refusing to leave the book club. They say they've never experienced fiction before and find it fascinating. A group of Vorn warriors have started teaching martial arts classes at the community center. The children love them. Chen smiled at each report. "Good, very good. Director, don't you think we should be concerned? These are enemy soldiers on our worlds." "Are they?" Chen leaned back in her chair. "Look at them, James. Really look. They came here expecting a war. Instead, they found people who wanted to know them, to understand them, to share with them. Which do you think is harder to fight?" James thought about it. "I suppose it's hard to shoot someone who just invited you to dinner?" "Exactly. Fear turns strangers into enemies. Connection turns enemies into friends." Chen looked out her window at the mountains. "We learned that the hard way. A long time ago. Now we're teaching it to the galaxy." 2 weeks into the occupation, Admiral Vithkal called a crisis meeting aboard his flagship. The mood was grim. Reports from the surface described military units becoming increasingly ineffective. Not because they were being attacked, but because they were being befriended. Soldiers were spending more time at human social gatherings than at their posts. Officers were writing requests for extended cultural studies instead of tactical assessments. "We are losing this war," Vethkal said flatly. "Not through battle, but through this." "Perhaps we should simply proceed with the original plan," suggested one of his commanders. "Establish military rule, suppress the population, show them we are serious." "How?" Vethkal demanded. "How do you suppress people who refuse to be afraid? How do you establish military rule over a population that treats you like tourists? Every time we set up a checkpoint, humans bring us refreshments. Every time we announce a curfew, they invite us to stay up late and play games." He pulled up new intelligence on the main screen. His voice dropped. "And that is not the worst of it." The screen showed data that had just arrived from Council deep-range sensors. Data that had not been shared with the fleet until now. Data that changed everything. "These are long-range scans of human infrastructure throughout their territory," Vethkal explained. "True scans using equipment that can see through their hiding measures. The Council has been monitoring them for decades, but the full results were classified at the highest levels." The room fell silent as the images appeared. Hidden in the asteroid belts around human colonies were weapons platforms of unprecedented size. Not dozens, Not hundreds, thousands, each one capable of destroying a fleet. In the spaces between stars where no species ever thought to look, massive construction facilities floated in the dark. They were building ships, ships larger than anything the Council had ever designed, ships that made the combined invasion fleet look like a collection of toys. And around Earth itself, partially hidden in dimensional folds that normal sensors could not detect, was something that defied description. A weapon? A shield? Both? The scanners could barely make sense of it. But whatever it was big enough to wrap around a planet. Humans have never shown us this, Vethkal said quietly. They have let us believe they were weak, vulnerable, primitive. He looked at his commanders, at their faces slowly draining of color as they understood. They have weapons that could destroy our entire fleet before we knew we were under attack. They have technology that makes our most advanced systems look like children's toys. They have been capable of defending themselves this entire time. Then why? One commander began. Why didn't they? Fethakal finished. Why are they treating us like guests instead of enemies? Why are they offering lemonade when they could offer annihilation? No one answered. No one could. On Earth, Director Chen received word that the intelligence had been leaked. Council High Command is in chaos, her aide reported. They're finally seeing what we really have. Chen nodded slowly. Good, it was time. Director, why did we hide it for so long? If they had known, they never would have declared war in the first place. That's exactly why we hid it. Chen stood and walked to her window. The sun was setting over the Alps, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. If we had shown them our strength, they would have feared us. They would have united against us as a threat. They would have built bigger weapons, formed stronger alliances, prepared for the war they believed was coming. She turned to face her aide. We didn't want them to fear us, James. We wanted them to know us. We wanted them to see that strength doesn't have to mean violence. That power doesn't have to mean destruction. That you can have the ability to destroy everything and still choose to build instead. But they declared war anyway. Yes, because they feared the unknown. They saw us growing, changing, expanding, and they didn't understand. Fear of what they didn't know was stronger than acceptance of what they did know. Chen smiled sadly. It's an old story, one our species knows very well. What happens now? Now they have to make a choice. They know what we're capable of. They know we could destroy them, and they know we haven't. Chen looked out at the darkening sky. The question is, what will they do with that knowledge? On Tau Ceti Prime, a teenage girl named Maya was sitting on a rooftop, watching the alien warships in orbit. A Thessan soldier found her there. He was young, probably the equivalent of a human teenager, with smooth gray scales and nervous eyes. His name was Thrix, and he had been part of the occupation force for 3 weeks. You should not be up here, he said, though his voice carried no real authority. It is not safe. From what? Maya asked. You guys don't seem very dangerous. Thrix sat down next to her, his long legs dangling over the edge of the roof. We were told you would fight, that humans were aggressive, unpredictable, dangerous. We can be, Maya admitted. We've done terrible things to each other. Wars, genocide, nearly blew up our whole planet a few times. Then why? Thrix struggled to find words. Why are you like this with us? We came to conquer you. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she pointed up at the warships. See those? Your ships. Yes. They're impressive, powerful, scary even. She lowered her hand. But you know what I see when I look at them? I see people, soldiers who probably miss their families, commanders who are probably confused about what's happening. Beings from other worlds who grew up looking at stars the same way I did, wondering what was out there. She turned to look at him. You're not our enemies, Thrix. You're our neighbors. We just haven't met properly yet. Thrix's scales flushed with color that Maya had learned to recognize as embarrassment. This is not how wars are supposed to work. Maybe that's because this isn't really a war, Maya smiled. Maybe it's just a really awkward introduction. High Chancellor Vorix received the full intelligence report on human military capabilities in his office on Nexus Prime. He read it 3 times. Then he sat in silence for an hour. Then he called Director Chen. "You could have destroyed us," he said when her image appeared on his screen. "At any point in the last century, you had the power." "Yes," Chen agreed simply. "Why didn't you?" Chen's expression was difficult to read. Sad, perhaps, or patient, or both. "Because we didn't want to." "That is not a strategy. That is not politics. That is." "It's a choice," Chen finished. "The same choice we've been making for centuries. The same choice that keeps us from using the weapons we build. The same choice that kept us from destroying ourselves when we had every reason to." "I do not understand." "I know." Chen's voice was gentle. "But you will. That's why we let you come. That's why we're showing you who we really are. Not the weapons, not the power, but the choice, the decision to be something better than what we could be." Vorix stared at her for a long moment. "What do you want from us?" "The same thing we've always wanted, Chancellor. The same thing we want from everyone we meet." Chen smiled. "We want you to choose too." The emergency session of the Galactic Council was called at midnight, station time. Species that had voted confidently for war only weeks ago now gathered in the grand amphitheater with very different expressions on their faces. Fear had replaced pride. Confusion had replaced certainty. High Chancellor Vorix stood at the center of the chamber, but he no longer seemed like the commanding figure who had announced the war. His scales were pale. His 4 hands trembled slightly. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "We have made an error," he began, "a profound error." The amphitheater buzzed with murmurs. Species that had never agreed on anything found themselves united in their uncertainty. "We declared war on humanity because we believed them to be a threat," Vorix continued. "We believed they were aggressive, unpredictable, dangerous. We believed that their rapid expansion and strange behaviors indicated hostile intent." He pulled up images on the massive screens above. Human colonies, human ships, human people going about their lives. "We were wrong." The murmurs grew louder. Several representatives called for clarification. Vorix raised a hand for silence. "New intelligence has revealed the true state of human military capability. I will share this information now. I ask that you remain calm." The screens changed. Weapons platforms and asteroid belts. Construction facilities between stars. The vast, incomprehensible structure surrounding Earth. Numbers appeared alongside the images. Force projections, capability estimates, destruction potential. Silence fell. Then panic began. "This is impossible," shouted the representative from the Vorn hegemony. "They have had this technology for how long?" "Decades," Vorix admitted. "Perhaps longer. They have hidden it deliberately." "Then we are already dead," cried another voice. "They will destroy us for this invasion." "No." Vorix's voice cut through the growing hysteria. "That is precisely the point. They will not." In orbit around Tau Ceti Prime, Admiral Vethkal was having a similar conversation with his commanders. "Our fleet could not survive a direct confrontation," he explained. "Their weapons technology is beyond anything we have developed. If they chose to attack, we would be gone before we knew what happened." "Then why are we still here?" demanded General Morvik, the Thessan ground commander, who had become unexpectedly famous for his burrito reviews. "Why haven't they struck?" "Because they don't want to." Vethakal pulled up recordings from the surface. Human civilians interacting with council soldiers. Shared meals, conversations, friendships forming despite everything. "Watch them," Really watch. Do these look like people preparing for war? The officers watched in silence. A human child was teaching a silicoid soldier how to skip stones across a pond. A group of Thessan troops was playing a human sport called soccer with local colonists. A Vorn warrior, terrifying by any standard, was having his portrait painted by a human artist who had somehow convinced him to wear a flower crown. This is their strategy, Vethkal said. This is their weapon, not the platforms in their asteroid belts, not the ships in the dark between stars. This. Connection? General Morvik asked, incredulous. Connection. Understanding. Making us see them as people instead of threats. Vethkal sat down heavily in his chair. And it's working. On Earth, Director Chen was preparing for the most important broadcast of her career. The Assembly Council had agreed unanimously. It was time to explain. The broadcast would reach every species in the galaxy, translated into thousands of languages, distributed through every communication network. For the first time in history, humanity would speak directly to the civilizations that had declared war on them. Chen stood in a simple room, facing a single camera. No special effects, no dramatic staging, just her voice and her words. Citizens of the galaxy, she began. My name is Margaret Chen. I speak for the human species. Across thousands of worlds, beings of every shape and size stopped what they were doing to watch. You have declared war on us. Your fleets have entered our territory. Your soldiers walk on our colonies. By any measure, we are at war. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. But we have not fought you. We have not activated our defenses. We have not used the weapons we possess. Many of you are now learning why. Images appeared on screens throughout the galaxy, the same images that had been shown to the Council. The true scale of human military power. Yes, we have these capabilities. Yes, we could have destroyed your fleets. We could have ended this war before it began, with fire and death and suffering. That is what many species would have done. That is what we ourselves might have done once. Chen's expression shifted. Something old and sad passed behind her eyes. But we chose differently. Let me tell you why. In the Grand Amphitheater, High Chancellor Vorix watched Chen's broadcast on the main screens, along with every other representative. 300 years ago, Chen continued, humanity stood at the edge of extinction, not from external threats, from ourselves. We had built weapons that could end our species in an afternoon. We had divided ourselves into factions, each convinced the others were enemies. We lived in constant fear, waiting for the moment when someone would finally push the button and end everything. Historical images appeared. Mushroom clouds, ruined cities, the faces of leaders who had held the fate of billions in their hands. Several times we came within minutes of annihilation, political crises, technical failures, misunderstandings that could have been our last. And every time somehow, someone chose not to launch. Someone chose to step back from the edge. Chen's voice hardened. We learned something during those years. Something important. Fear is the enemy. Fear makes you see threats where none exist. Fear makes you build bigger weapons, tighter alliances, stronger walls. Fear creates the very wars you're afraid of. She leaned forward slightly. So we stopped being afraid. Not by pretending the threats weren't real, by choosing to respond differently, by deciding that the way to survive was not to destroy our enemies, but to make them into friends. On Tau Ceti Prime, Maya and Thrix were watching the broadcast on a tablet, sitting on the same rooftop where they'd met. Is this true? Thrix asked. Your species really almost destroyed itself? Multiple times, Maya confirmed. My great-great-grandmother lived through one of the worst crises. She told my grandmother stories about hiding in bunkers, waiting for bombs that never came. How did you survive? Maya smiled slightly. We got lucky, and then we got smart. We realized that having the power to destroy everything meant we had to be very careful about how we used it. On the tablet, Chen continued speaking. When we discovered we were not alone in the galaxy, we faced a choice. We could show you our weapons, prove our strength, demand respect through fear. That is the path most species take. It is understandable. It is logical in its way. But we chose something else. We chose to appear weak, to seem harmless, to let you underestimate us, because we hoped that if you didn't fear us, you might actually get to know us. It didn't work, Chen admitted. You feared us anyway, not because of our weapons, but because we were different. We moved too fast, asked too many questions, didn't follow your rules. You couldn't predict us, and that scared you more than any weapon ever could. In the amphitheater, representatives shifted uncomfortably. Chen was describing their fears with uncomfortable accuracy. So you declared war, Chen continued. You assembled your fleets and came to our worlds, ready to teach us our place in the galaxy, ready to show us that we were small and weak and must submit to the established order. Her expression softened. And what did you find? You found farmers offering lemonade, children wanting to play, artists and teachers and cooks and dreamers. You found people who were more interested in knowing you than fighting you. This is not a strategy. This is not a trick. This is who we are. Chen stood straighter. We have weapons that could destroy your civilizations. We have technology that makes your most advanced systems obsolete. We have had these capabilities for longer than you realize, and we have chosen every single day not to use them. That choice is what makes us human, not our biology, not our history. The choice to build instead of destroy, to connect instead of conquer, to offer our hand instead of raising our fist. Admiral Vethkal watched the broadcast in his quarters, alone. His untouched dinner sat beside him, growing cold. We are showing you our true strength now, Chen said. Not so you will fear us, not so you will submit. We are showing you because we want you to understand. Power is not about what you can destroy. It is about what you choose not to destroy. Strength is not about forcing others to submit. It is about having the ability to force them and choosing instead to invite them to dinner. We do not want to rule the galaxy. We do not want to conquer or dominate or control. We want something much simpler and much harder. Chen's voice carried across light years, reaching beings who had never seen a human in person, who had only heard stories of the strange, frightening species from the spiral arm. We want neighbors. We want friends. We want to share this vast, beautiful, terrifying universe with beings who see what we see when we look at the stars. Wonder, curiosity, hope. We have been alone with ourselves for too long. We know what happens when a species has no one to talk to but itself. We know the darkness that grows in isolation. We do not want that for ourselves, and we do not want it for you. On Nexus Prime, High Chancellor Vorix felt something crack inside his chest. Not pain, something else. An old certainty, breaking apart. So we are not going to fight you, Chen continued. We are going to welcome you. Your soldiers are already discovering this. They came expecting war and found hospitality. They expected enemies and found hosts. Some of you will say this is a trick, a strategy to disarm us, to make us vulnerable. You will look for the hidden agenda, the secret plan. She shook her head slowly. There is no hidden agenda. There is no secret plan. We are simply choosing to treat you the way we wish we had been treated. The way we had to learn to treat each other after centuries of doing it wrong. We are choosing to see you as neighbors, as friends, as family we haven't met yet. The question is, what will you choose? The broadcast ended. Across the galaxy, silence reigned. Then slowly things began to change. On Tau Ceti Prime, a Thessan squad leader put down his weapon and asked a human colonist to teach him how to cook. In the amphitheater, representatives began to talk not about war, but about what they had just heard. In the fleet orbiting human space, soldiers looked at their weapons and wondered if they would ever need to use them again. And on Earth, Director Chen turned off the camera and let out a long breath. "Did it work?" James asked. "I don't know yet." Chen looked out the window at the night sky, full of stars. "But we've done what we can. Now it's up to them." Somewhere out there, thousands of species were wrestling with a new idea. The idea that strength didn't have to mean violence, that power didn't have to mean destruction, that the right response to fear might not be more fear, but something entirely different. Something that started with lemonade and ended with understanding. The war ended not with a battle, but with a barbecue. The idea came from a human colonist on Tau Ceti Prime, a woman named Elena, who ran a small restaurant in the main settlement. She had been feeding council soldiers for weeks, watching them slowly transform from invaders into regulars. One evening, as she served a group of Thessan officers who had become surprisingly fond of her cooking, she made a suggestion. "Why don't we just invite everyone to dinner? I mean, everyone. The whole galaxy." The officers laughed at first, then they stopped laughing. Then they looked at each other with expressions of wonder. "Could that work?" one of them asked. Elena shrugged. "Only one way to find out." The idea traveled up through the chain of command, from the Thessan officers to Admiral Vethkal to High Chancellor Vorix himself. It was ridiculous. It was impossible. It was completely, utterly, perfectly human. Vorix approved it. The gathering was held on Earth, on the fields outside Geneva. Not in the mountains or in some impressive monument, but in ordinary green fields where humans had gathered for centuries to celebrate, to mourn, to simply be together. Ships arrived from across the galaxy, not warships anymore, though many had been weeks before. They had been repurposed, redecorated, filled with delegates and observers and curious citizens from every species that had participated in the war. The logistics were impossible. The language barriers were immense. The cultural differences between species that had never met face to face threatened to create chaos at every turn. But the humans were ready. Volunteers numbered in the millions. They set up translation stations and dietary accommodation centers. They created information booths where curious aliens could learn about human customs and where curious humans could learn about theirs. They built playgrounds where children of every species could meet and quiet spaces where those overwhelmed by the crowds could rest. And everywhere, there was food. Human cuisines from every culture on Earth were represented. Spicy dishes for the Thessans, who had developed a surprising addiction to peppers. Mineral preparations for the silicoids, carefully researched to provide the elements their crystalline bodies craved. Protein combinations for the Vorn, who were delighted to discover that humans understood the importance of a good steak. High Chancellor Vorix arrived with a delegation of 1,000, representing the core species of the Council. He was greeted at the landing site by Director Chen, who was wearing a simple dress and a warm smile. "Welcome to Earth, Chancellor." Vorix looked around at the fields full of beings from across the galaxy, at the humans moving among them with trays of food and offers of assistance, at the children already playing together despite having never seen each other's species before. "This is not what I expected," he admitted. "What did you expect?" "I am not certain anymore." He turned back to her. "Perhaps that is the point." The first day of the gathering was chaos in the best possible way. Silicoid delegates discovered human libraries and had to be gently extracted hours later, their crystalline bodies glowing with the colors of pure intellectual joy. The San warriors challenged human athletes to competitions and found themselves evenly matched for the first time in their military careers. Vorn commanders, fierce and proud, were adopted by human children who wanted to braid ribbons into their tusks. Admiral Vethkal found himself at a table with a human veteran of Earth's last major war, a conflict that had ended before the Council even knew humanity existed. They traded stories over glasses of something called whiskey, discovering that warriors across the galaxy faced the same struggles, the same fears, the same doubts. "I spent 40 years fighting," the human veteran said. His name was Marcus, and his face was lined with memories. "Always thought I'd die in battle, never expected to live long enough to see peace. I have commanded fleets for longer than your species has been in space," Vethakal replied. "I have won victories and suffered defeats, but I have never experienced anything like this." "Like what?" Vethkal gestured at the scene around them. Thousands of species, mingling and talking and sharing. Former enemies discovering common ground. Fear dissolving into curiosity. This, making peace by simply refusing to make war. Marcus smiled and refilled their glasses. "We had to learn how. Took us a long time and a lot of mistakes. But once you figure it out, it seems so obvious." "What does?" "That the people you're fighting are just people. Once you see that, really see it, fighting becomes a lot harder." Marcus raised his glass. "To seeing." Vethakal raised his own. "To seeing." On the second day, Director Chen gave a speech. It was short, simple, and delivered from a small stage in the middle of the fields. "A few weeks ago," she said, "the Galactic Council declared war on humanity. They assembled the largest fleet in history. They came to our worlds expecting to conquer us." She looked out at the crowd. Every species that had voted for war was represented. Every soldier who had been sent to invade human space was there. "And here we are," she continued, "not as victors and defeated, not as conquerors and conquered, just as people who decided to have dinner together instead of killing each other." A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Even species that did not laugh understood the sound now. "I am not going to pretend this is the end of all our problems," Chen said. "There will be misunderstandings. There will be conflicts. There will be times when we annoy each other, when we disagree, when we wonder if this whole galactic community thing is really worth the effort." She smiled. "But that's what family is like. You don't choose your family. You don't always agree with them. Sometimes you want to strangle them, but at the end of the day, you're stuck with each other, so you might as well figure out how to get along. The galaxy is our family now, all of us. Whether we like it or not." She spread her arms wide. "So let's eat." High Chancellor Vorik sought out Director Chen near the end of the second day. He found her at a food stall, eating something called a hot dog with evident enjoyment. "Director, may I speak with you?" "Of course, Chancellor. Want one?" She gestured at the food stall. Vorix examined the offering with suspicion, then accepted. The resulting experience was strange but not unpleasant. "I have been thinking," he said as they walked together through the crowds, "about what you said in your broadcasts about power and choice. And I have commanded armies. I have ruled planets. I have made decisions that affected billions of lives." He paused. "I always believed that power meant control. That strength meant the ability to force others to submit. That's what most species believe. But you do not." "No." Chen finished her hot dog and wiped her hands on a napkin. "We learned the hard way that control is an illusion. You can force people to obey, but you can't force them to agree. You can conquer a world, but you can't conquer the hearts of the people who live there." "Then what is power?" Chen thought about it for a moment. "Power is the ability to create change. Real power, lasting power, comes from changing how people think, how they feel, what they believe is possible." She gestured at the gathering around them. "This is power, not the weapons we could have used, but the connection we're building instead." Vorix watched a group of Thessan children playing with human children, their laughter mixing into a sound that transcended species. He watched his soldiers trading recipes with human cooks. He watched the silicoid delegates, lost in conversation with human philosophers, their colors pulsing with excitement. "How do you do it?" he asked quietly. "How do you simply choose not to be afraid?" Chen laughed softly. "Who said we're not afraid? We're terrified. All the time. Of failure, of loss, of the million things that could go wrong. Then how? We just decided that fear wasn't going to make our choices for us anymore." She looked at him with eyes that held centuries of human history. Fear is a warning signal. It tells you that something matters, that there's risk involved, but it shouldn't be the thing that decides what you do. That's your job. That's always your job. Vorix was silent for a long moment. "The council will need to change," he said finally. "The way we govern, the way we interact, the way we see other species. It cannot be the same after this." "Change is scary," Chen agreed, "but staying the same is scarier. Trust me on that one." On the third and final day of the gathering, a vote was held, not in the grand amphitheater of Nexus Prime, with its imposing crystal walls and formal procedures. This vote was held in the fields outside Geneva, with delegates sitting on blankets and folding chairs, surrounded by the remnants of 3 days of celebration. The question was simple: how would the galaxy move forward? The old council could not simply be reformed. Too much had changed. Too many assumptions had been shattered. A new framework was needed, one that reflected what everyone had learned. Proposals were debated, modified, debated again. Species that had never agreed on anything found common ground. Old enemies discovered shared goals. By the end of the day, something unprecedented had emerged. The galaxy would not have a single governing body anymore. Instead, it would have a network of connections, treaties, and agreements that link species together without forcing them into a single system. Trade would be regulated by mutual consent. Conflicts would be resolved through mediation before military action. New species would be welcomed, not feared. And humanity? Humanity would serve a unique role. Not rulers, not members, but something else. Mediators, connectors. The species that laughed at war and meant it. "You know what this means," said Ambassador Krethvol, approaching Director Chen after the vote was concluded. "You will be expected to help resolve conflicts between species that have hated each other for millennia." "I know." "You will be asked to mediate disputes that have no good solutions." "I know." "You will be blamed when things go wrong and ignored when things go right." Chen smiled. "Sounds like family." Krethvol's crystalline body flickered with colors that Chen had learned to recognize as amusement. "You are a strange species, Director." "Thank you, Ambassador. We try." The gathering ended on the morning of the fourth day. Ships departed, carrying delegates back to worlds across the galaxy. The fields outside Geneva were cleaned up by volunteers, the evidence of the largest interspecies gathering in history disappearing into recycling bins in memory. Director Chen stood at her window in the assembly building, watching the last ships disappear into the sky. James joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "It worked," he said, handing her one. "I wasn't sure it would, but it worked." "It worked for now," Chen corrected. "The hard part is keeping it going, building on what we started here, making sure the connections we form don't fade when everyone goes home." "Do you think they will?" Chen thought about the Thessan commander who had learned to cook human food, who was planning to open a restaurant on his home world. She thought about the silicoid scholars who had discovered science fiction and were already writing their own stories. She thought about the Vorn warriors who had promised to return next year with their families. "No," she said finally, "I don't think they will." She took a sip of her coffee and looked up at the sky, at the stars that now held neighbors instead of strangers. "You know what the funny thing is," she said. The council declared war because they were afraid of us, afraid we were too aggressive, too dangerous, too unpredictable. And now they know we're all of those things and more. Chen smiled. But they also know we choose what to do with it. Every day, every moment, we choose. She turned from the window and set down her coffee. Come on, we've got work to do. The galaxy isn't going to connect itself. In the years that followed, the gathering outside Geneva became a tradition. Every year, ships from across the galaxy came to Earth to celebrate, to reconnect, to remember the moment when fear gave way to understanding. The Thessan Empire reformed itself, its rigid military hierarchy softened by exposure to human ideas about choice and freedom. The Silicoid Collective discovered art and literature, and their crystalline cities began to include spaces for creativity alongside their halls of logic. The Vorn, fierce warriors who had conquered worlds, became fierce protectors of the galactic peace, their strength directed toward defense instead of conquest. And humanity? Humanity continued to be exactly what it had always been: strange, unpredictable, dangerous in ways that no other species quite understood, but also kind, also generous, also utterly, impossibly hopeful. The galaxy had expected conquerors or victims. They got family. And somehow, against all odds, that was enough. On the anniversary of the war that never was, Director Chen received a message from High Chancellor Vorix. He had retired from politics years ago, but they had stayed in touch. Director, he wrote, I have been thinking about our first real conversation, when I asked you what humanity wanted from the galaxy. I remember, Chen replied. You said you wanted neighbors, friends, people to share this ridiculous universe with. At the time, I thought you were being diplomatic, saying what you thought I wanted to hear. And now? Now I understand that you were telling the exact truth, which I have learned is the most human thing of all. Chen smiled as she read the message. Outside her window, the stars were coming out, and somewhere up there, beings who had once been enemies were now waiting to hear from their friends. Neighbors, she said softly, to no one in particular. Friends, family. It had been a good war, the best kind. The kind that ended with laughter and a promise to meet again soon.